I'm Suzi Smith. I am 62 years old, and I have three sons. My middle son is in spirit. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and as an avocation, as a volunteer, I counsel bereaved parents. It's something I fell into years ago. It's a mission for me and a goal, and I think my purpose in life I've come to discover, and I love it. I do it every afternoon for about 4 hours. I talk to anywhere from 1 to 4 parents an afternoon, so 5 days a week, sometimes weekends also, depending on schedules. They're all over the place, in Bombay and Bulgaria and the UK, France, not just only in the States. So it makes it very interesting, and this technology certainly helps that. But my story, as far as this work goes, really begins in 2004 when my 23-year-old son passed through suicide. It was a complete and total shock to all of us. He really didn't suffer from depression. We didn't see it coming. And we were all just flummoxed by it. He did come to me 3 days later, I will tell you. I was in bed, sleeping. There was a light emanating from the hallway outside of my bedroom. And I heard, "Mom, Mom." And I woke up to that sound, and I sat up, and he was standing at the foot of my bed, the full person, wearing exactly what he would wear, looking exactly like he did when I last seen him, which was a few days before. And he didn't speak, but he communicated to me that he was okay, that he loved us very much, and he was happier. And then he walked out of the bedroom, just walked out of the bedroom. And I sat there for a little while, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. It didn't freak me out. It didn't make me nervous. It didn't scare me. I went right back to sleep. I never forgot it. I never forgot it. However, at that time in my life, I was a traditional Christian. I had heard a lot about the afterlife from people. People would try to tell me about it, and it would go in one ear and out the other, because, you know, it's saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, the teacher hadn't appeared for me yet. So I wasn't open to this whole way of thinking or belief system at that point. But I was not at all shocked by the fact that he did appear. It was about 5 years later that I began to get into studying the afterlife. But before that, I will tell you that the loss of my son was tremendously traumatic. It was a violent death. It was unexpected. All losses, especially losses of children, are traumatic and very difficult to recover from. Suicide is also very traumatic because it's a particular type of death, and carries with it a lot of what other deaths do too as well, but some special considerations like guilt and what you could have done and those kinds of things. So I didn't do very well. I functioned, but I didn't do very well. And then about a year later, and I want people to know this is my path. This is not everyone else's path. This will not necessarily be what happens to you on your journey, your bereavement journey, but this is what happened to me a month later. I think because my family had a history of some mental illness, I had a complete, old-fashioned nervous breakdown. I just completely broke, and I did not do well at all. I was not doing well at all. And I needed to go into the hospital. I went in the hospital and then found a doctor who was able to treat me. And it was actually medication that helped bring me back to myself. This process took several years though, and quite a few doctors actually. It was a process, and it was a gripping depression unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I have great empathy now for people who suffer from depression. I do make the distinction between grief and depression, and I think that we have to do that with our loved ones and understand when intervention or extra help is needed, as opposed to grief counseling and that sort of thing, because it can get very complicated. But for me, it was quite complicated. But I did recover, and when I recovered, I had a God moment, and I had many of them. And I call them God moments. And I just heard God in the back of my mind saying, you need to do something. You need to go do something for other people. You know, I had been a housewife. I did things. I shopped and I had lunch with girlfriends. I was quite active, actually. I thought I had a full life. I didn't know a thing. I didn't know anything. The person that's sitting here in front of you today is not at all the person I was before. I wasn't a bad person. I just wasn't a person whose life was about helping others and making that their mission. I was about raising my children and that sort of thing. So at any rate, I thought, well, what can I do? What can I possibly do? I guess I could read to children or do something with the homeless or feed people or visit the elderly. And then all of a sudden hospice popped into my head. And I remember thinking, hospice, why would you think that? You've just gone through this traumatic, awful death. And why on earth would you think to do hospice? And I didn't have an answer for that, but I pursued it. And I went through all of the training and the background checks and everything involved in it, and started to become a hospice volunteer, working with patients directly in patient care, particularly. And I worked in a, not a residential, but a hospital setting. So I was very much hands-on with all the patients. Our setting housed 16 beds, and it was for people who were already in the hospice program at home or in their senior care living, who had a secondary issue other than the reason why they were dying. So in other words, they might have C. diff or MRSA or pneumonia or something else that was complicating their situation. And they actually needed nurses and doctors right there with them at all times. But the criteria was they were within 2 weeks of death. So it was very interesting. And it actually turned out to be very, very hard. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I went once a week. I didn't stop going. I kept going. I figured that, I did this because I wanted to feel better about myself. I wanted to feel like I was doing something. Like I wanted to feel better. I wanted to feel good. And, but it was so hard. And I finally decided to take a break. And I told the people I work with, I needed to just take a little break to reevaluate. So I took a little break. It was only about a week or two. And during that time, I heard that voice again saying, no, you're looking at this all wrong. It isn't about how you feel. It's about them. Get back there. So I marched myself back to hospice and had a completely different experience. With a change of mind and a change of attitude, I loved it and I fell in love with it. And it became a big part of my life until I broke my foot many years later and could no longer be on my feet like that. And I've since stopped. But it was a wonderful thing and an introduction in my life to beginning to help other people. At that same time, I was involved with a couple of suicide organizations, and I became not a caring listener like Helping Parents Heal has, but really a visitor for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and another organization called TAPS, which is for military families. And so I would go on home visits. Usually there were two of us that went. The programs were set up so that they didn't like to send the same people twice to the same family, which I thought was odd because I thought creating a bond would be a good thing, but those were the rules, and I went with them. And I felt that we were doing some good, but it was a stiff experience, very stiff. And we couldn't really get into anything of any depth. We essentially went and gave them resources, handed them resources, and it wasn't very fulfilling. And then I started to, through Facebook, get involved in some suicide groups. And that's when I started to post my little messages, because I was recovering so well that I wanted people to know that they could also. But what really helped me to recover was that around the time I started hospice, my other God voice said, you need to read Emanuel Swedenborg, who I didn't really know anything about. But I was really curious about heaven because I had this concept of my son in heaven, and really that was the only concept I had. I was at peace with him being there, but I wanted more answers. So I read Swedenborg, and I thought it was fascinating. It pulled me in. And as synchronicity works, or as fate would have it, it led me to something else, another way of thinking, and another aspect of the afterlife, where I learned, and I would read someone else and all of their work, which led me to another book, which eventually led me to reading hundreds of books and to where I am today with this intense belief in the afterlife. I've had a number of personal experiences. I've had some incredible readings, which I started to do after I had this discovery. One of the most transformational readings was with Suzi Smith. And she gave me such clear evidence of what my son was doing. And in fact, on this week's letter, Victor posted a video of Suzi Smith, and she speaks about what our loved ones are doing on the other side. And she talks about Alex. And so in that reading, he made an impression upon her and upon me, because my son was a Marine. He had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and he was always going places very fast and driving fast and that sort of thing. But she said he was doing this, sort of sitting in silence and meditation. And then she gave me much more information. So I showed the video to my husband the minute he came home, and we were floored. We were floored by it. So I really believed. I'll just jump back a little bit and tell you that my husband and I aren't newlyweds. We are remarried. We both have children from other marriages. We've been married 13 years. When I met him, he had a former girlfriend who was very involved in the afterlife and the new age, was what I called it at the time. And they had split up, but he had retained a lot of her library, a lot of it. And I, as a Christian, got rid of all of it, which I've now, of course, had to go back and buy every book. So, if you're listening, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. You were right, and I was wrong. So I just want to say that. So I did go back and repurchase all those books, which is kind of funny. But I transformed so much that my traditional Christian beliefs no longer fit with my belief system that now, and so at any rate, but through these forums, Facebook groups, I would post little messages of hope for people, because I felt like I had recovered so well and was so happy and was actually at a place where I was no longer in pain. If you can imagine that, if you can imagine going from a person who was such a danger to herself that she had to be hospitalized, to going from that to not caring if I lived or died. So I lived there for a while too, in that place where I didn't care if I lived or died. I lived there for a while. And then I guess one morning I woke up and decided I did want to live. And I can't tell you how long I was in each phase. And I know other parents go through those phases, and they all have different timelines as well. But I did go through that phase. But to go from there to being happier and more fulfilled than I'd ever been in my life was a complete shock. And so I wanted people to know that they could recover. And so I would just post these little messages, and then people would contact me. I would offer to speak with them if they wanted to contact me, and they would contact me. And so we would have Zoom meetings or face-to-face meetings like this, or often phone, a lot of phone. And I would tell them about my story. And but the main thing that I do with parents, and that I did, was I listened. I asked them their story first. I want to hear all about them and about their child's name, their story, and where they are in their journey. And I absorb all of that. Keep in mind, I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't have a degree. I'm just a mother who's lost a child, who has a heart for helping other people to have hope that they can be happy again. And I use myself as a prime example. And so I've gotten quite busy, actually. A couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to stumble upon Helping Parents Heal, which is a wonderful site. And it's different than the other groups that I'm in, because it is a site that also accepts the afterlife, which is so wonderful, because you're not constrained. I was very constrained when I was working with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and also constrained often, I feel, when I'm working with other suicide groups that may be Christian and of other faiths, more restrained about discussing where our kids are. Some people just are not interested in hearing that. They just don't want to hear it. But on Helping Parents Heal, they always want to hear it, and they always want to hear those stories. And I have great stories about being in touch with my son and getting great messages from him. So I did become an active member of Helping Parents Heal, and then I became a caring listener. And it's really kept me quite busy. I continue to post my little messages, and I continue to hear from mothers, all kinds of mothers, all kinds of circumstances. It is the most joyous and wonderful thing I could experience. It is never difficult for me. I walk away from it feeling uplifted and energetic. I feel as if I am protected in a blanket of protection from my guides and my angels, really working with me and protecting me. And my son Alex works with me. He brings young people, he has them, and we connect as mothers. And there have been many readings I've had where the child of a mother I'm working with has come through with a message for the mother, which is really exciting and fun to pass along. So it's grown. I've gotten much busier. But what I really want to convey to people is the fact that I attribute my total healing to helping other people, to stepping outside of myself and my identity as the parent of a child who had passed, to a woman who was living again a wonderful life and had great hope for the future. And I want other people to have that kind of hope and belief that they can be happy also, and not become victimized by this terrible physical loss. So that's my story in short. Does anyone have any questions for me? Because I can certainly fill in from there.
Suzi, tell us a little bit more about Alex and about your communications with Alex and what he's doing now. Tell us about who he is and his values and how he's doing in the afterlife.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. I love that you used his name. I always use the names of the children of the parents I work with. We want to hear their names, don't we? You know, we just want to hear their names. Alex is wonderful. He was 23 when he passed, so he'd be about 37 now. I'm not sure how old he is over there, but I know he's still good looking. He was a Marine, but I think he'd had a rough time in the Marine Corps. I don't think it was a great fit for him. He was a quiet child. His brothers were very athletic and very outgoing, and Alex was a little more introspective and intellectual, which made the Marines seem quite interesting when he made that choice. So he went straight from high school into the Marine Corps, where he spent 4 years. He then got out and went back to college to finish his degree, and that's when he passed. I think what happened with Alex is that what I was told is that he had gone through a period of depression and had gone on medication, and then had gone abruptly off the medication and had a psychotic break, which created a situation where he made a very impulsive decision. And that is what he has confirmed to me through evidential readings. He did say that while he hid it from all of us, it was something he thought about from the time he was about 15. I think it was my reading with Suzanne where I said, Alex, did you have an unhappy childhood? And she said, Suzanne looked at me and she says, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the truth. He said, it wasn't the greatest. He's doing this. And I thought, oh, gee, you know, because we didn't know. I didn't know that. He takes full responsibility for not communicating. He admits he wasn't a communicator and he kept it all inside. But I do want to say that I'm closer to Alex now than I ever was when he was on this side. He goes with me places all the time. He likes to go with me to my manicures. Craig Hogan has a wonderful program, which I did. which helped me to connect. Hi, Craig, which helped me to connect with my son, Alex. Suzanne Gieselman has a wonderful meditation, which also helped me to connect with Alex, to the point that I have been able to hear him behind my right ear. It took a while. It took a lot of saying, is that you, or are those my thoughts, my own thoughts? And I think, Craig, you helped me with that a little bit. And I finally got it down. And so he tells me all kinds of things. I think I was telling Wendy and Karen earlier that he told me that my oldest son, his older brother, was pregnant. And then a week later, he told me that they were going to have twins. So when I called my son, of course, both times, he was completely shocked. And in fact, that came true. I have twin grandchildren now. So he sends me lots of messages. Michael Jackson songs are huge. We were both big fans. And I have a special heart for Michael Jackson. And Alex knows that. So at really interesting times, he sends me those beautiful songs. And he's been after me to do things like this, and to perhaps write, and to continue this work as much as I possibly can. He's very encouraging, and I think he's proud of me. And I'm very happy that I have a son on the other side who is very happy with how his family is doing with he no longer being in the physical. I think so many people on the other side just want to communicate with their loved ones, and their loved ones aren't open to it, or they don't know about it. And I can only imagine how frustrated they might be, just wanting to get through that veil. And I hurt for the young people in particular that want their parents to hear them, and to not cry. I mean, you have to cry, you have to grieve, you have to go through that period of bereavement, but to, at some point, do what the Buddhists call hindaku iyaku, which is to turn poison into medicine. And that's what I like to think I did with this terrible loss in the physical. When I tell you I'm not in pain, I mean that literally. I feel absolutely no pain at my loss. I do feel a little bit of wistfulness from time to time. For example, my youngest son is getting married next week, and Alex will not be there with us in the physical. And I'm a little wistful about that, but he's going to be honored during the course of the wedding, which will be lovely. And he will be there. He's already told me he's going to be there. So of course he'll be there. So at any rate, Alex and I are very, very close. I talk to him all during the day, often. And he leads me to books. He leads me to YouTubes. He talks a lot about, in readings, about my husband, Ron, who he didn't know, but he loves very much and has great affection for. And Ron was the one who was with me. I met Ron a year after Alex passed, and I married him a year later. So Ron was with me through the thick and thin, and some of it was really ugly, really difficult times. And he was a wonderful support and continues to be wonderful, and supports me in all my endeavors, and loves that I do this. So Alex has been able to communicate his love of Ron to me, and great messages and great pieces of evidence about his brothers and all kinds of amazing things. So I always tell people, or I always told people that when I would be asked that if I believed in an afterlife, I would say 99.9999999%, even with my evidential readings. Because there's one tiny little part of me that until I'm there, I've just got to reserve that one tiny little part. But yes, yeah, it's real. Our kids are there. Your kids are there. But then I had a reading about 2 months ago that took me to 150%. It was so evidential that it was like nothing I've ever experienced. The medium gave me the name of my grandmother, which was Mabel, that she was from Mississippi, that she was heavy, and that she had false teeth. He gave me the first and middle name of my father. None of this information is searchable or available. He gave me the name of my great aunt Mildred, who was from Mississippi. He said they were from Mississippi. He talked about my younger son and how my son Alex used to pick on him and even torture him, which he did. He tortured him. And he said, I think he locked him outside of the house in a snowstorm when he was about 4 or 5. And at that point, I just screamed, I said, oh my gosh, he did. And the reading was like that throughout the entire reading. I've watched it many times since then, but I get it. I really get it. Work with me. He does greet those that have passed, often through suicide. It can be a little bit of a traumatic passing and an adjustment. And I know that some people who pass in that manner do feel some regret that their family is suffering. And I know Alex wanted to come through and express that, of course, which we forgave. And we're really good now. We're really wonderful. But he does that. I'm told he has a daughter. So I don't know what the circumstances are, nor have I asked of his former girlfriend, but apparently they lost a baby, and she is with him, and he loves that. And he is also doing what Suzanne Giesemann says, and that is sitting in silence. And he expressed to me that I need to meditate more. The more I will meditate and sit in silence with him, the more we can communicate and the closer we can become. And he said, Mom, I know you. Now don't get obsessed with this, because I tend to get obsessed with subjects and things. He says, don't get obsessed with this. But if you'll do this on a regular basis, I promise we can get closer. And then he describes 2 aquariums side by side with the water rippling, and says that if the water's rippling in one and you're in one, or the water's rippling in the other, and you're not sitting still, you can't see each other unless you're still. So he gave Suzanne that image. And I thought, how does my marine, fast-driving son come up with such a beautiful image? Wow, Alex. So he really is a different person over there than he was here. He's a very joyful person. He's very, very funny. And I know he was funny here too, but he was quiet. But he's very funny. He's also a very good communicator. Apparently, he's been there a long time. 2004 is 15 years. So he's had time to, I guess, get his chops up, so to speak. So he's pretty good at communicating, and is good with imagery, and comes through pretty strong. So I always get great evidence with Alex. But he does work with me. I know that he sits with me often when I'm on the phone with parents. I don't do any preparation before I speak with a parent. I just get some basic information from them, and I call them, and we speak. I do ask my guides and my angels to step in and be with me. And really, it is almost like I channel when I communicate with them. Somehow, in some manner, the right words seem to tumble out of my awkward mouth. I don't know how it happens, but it does. Well, I know how it happens. They're helping me. They're doing it. So they're there, and they do this work. It's a team. They all do this work with me. And I wish I had found this earlier. I was in my mid-50s, I guess, when I found this calling and this mission. But this really is, I've come to discover my purpose in my life. A number of organizations through Helping Parents Heal, and also through a couple of suicide Facebook pages, or even life pages. I think, Wendy, in fact, that might be where you saw one of my posts, or maybe it was on Help Heal, but it was maybe proof of Afterlife or something like that. Okay. So if I see someone is suffering in a particular way that touches me, and then I get the message to reach out, and that tingle up my leg, and I'll reach out, post a message to them, flat out that I believe in an afterlife, and that my son is with me and has not died. And then I have to gauge how they react, because keep in mind that my mission is to help a grieving parent. It isn't to sell them my belief or way of thinking necessarily. Right. It's really to comfort them and give them hope that they can have a future that is not filled with the kind of pain they're experiencing now. So I have to be, in Helping Parents Heal, it's wonderful. I think everyone there really understands that we believe in an afterlife. But on the others, I have to be somewhat careful at times. There's some religions that don't approve of that, and so I have to be sure I can still accomplish my goal and not alienate which is unfortunate that this information would alienate someone. If not alienate, they just wouldn't even get it, which is the person that I was. I think you remember earlier, I described that I just didn't get it. I just didn't get it. People told me about the afterlife, and it went in one ear and out the other. And I really, truly do believe that if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, there comes a time in your life where you get exposed to these facts and this knowledge. And if you are open to it, that is a great gift. And then you begin to study, and then you begin to grow and grow and grow and deepen your spiritual journey. It's just wonderful. It's an incredible thing that happens that never stops. And, I was lucky enough to find myself in that place, thanks to Emanuel Swedenborg, or the God voice,
Tell me about the God voice that you have. Did you have that as a child, or when did you first hear that God voice?
It developed after Alex passed. It developed then, and it told me a lot of things. It's interesting. It's told me things. In fact, one thing that I think may have tremendously helped my marriage. Ron and I went through a bit of a fractious time, and I was a bit argumentative, I think, a little difficult, and not the easiest person. And one morning I woke up and I had this thought. What if you're not right about everything? In fact, what if you're wrong? And I also remember it was right around the time of the election when things were so difficult and there was so much discourse and disagreement. And people were so polarized. And I remembered thinking, what would happen if you were wrong? What's the worst thing that will happen to you if you're wrong? And I played that scenario out, and I found that actually nothing is going to happen. And what are you afraid of? And it turns out I'm afraid of my own ego. It's pride. It's a matter of pride. So I just sort of threw that away. And I really changed. I changed fundamentally. I just woke up that morning and I changed fundamentally as a person. So it took Ron a little while to get used to this new Suzi, and he could be a bit confrontational, and I would just slough it off like this. And it really took him a couple of months to understand that I wasn't going to argue. And once he got that down, it's been smooth sailing ever since. That's another God moment that I had that really impacted my life and has been very helpful for me.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts about life planning? Do you believe that you and Alex had an agreement about this before you both incarnated? You must have come across things about this. Is this something you're open about?
Yes, yeah, I am. And when I tell you I've read hundreds of books, believe me, I have. I've read Schwartz, and I've read everyone and their works in depth and detail. I read The Law of One, word by word. I did. So I read and absorb everything, and as most people do, I think I take and retain what speaks to me and what resonates with me, and I put aside the rest, which I might go back and pick up later. But I was very interested in that and found it very interesting. And I do believe that we did have life planning, and that we are in a soul group, and that we did plan this. I don't think it was planned that Alex would come in with the intention of suicide, but I think it was planned that there might be the possibility that that would happen. And to be honest with you all, losing Alex was the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but it was through losing him that I got my greatest gifts. So yes, I think it was planned.
Interesting.
I loved it. Thank you, Craig, for that. I loved it. It was absolutely wonderful for me. I loved it. I think meditation is wonderful, but I also, I talk to parents a lot about the afterlife, and they want to hear my stories about Alex and my affirmation and my evidence, because when they hear that and they hear these stories, then they know their child is there. It's so exciting. But I also talk very practically with parents that are suffering. In fact, I have a list of resources that aren't necessarily afterlife related, but there are a number of things that people who are suffering do and need and can do and need to do, particularly people that are suffering from PTSD, from a traumatic and tragic loss. And one of them is EMDR, which I did and really benefited from. And it was interesting because I just had a couple of little triggers. And one of them was the fact that I didn't pick up the phone when Alex called. And I was going out somewhere and I was late, and I thought, well, I'll call him back in the morning. And there was no morning. And so that would trigger me a little bit. And I went, did EMDR, gone, just like that. Leesburg, Virginia, actually. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. She does EMDR, Life Between Lives, I think. And Alex did appear. He was there during that session. She helped me with a number of things. I had 2 sessions with her, and it was really wonderful, really, really wonderful. But, you know, I also recommend people who might need cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes people need medication. I needed medication. It's not a panacea, but I had a brain problem, and I needed medication for a period of time, and I think it did help to save my life. Meditation is wonderful also. Tapping, EFT, is wonderful. And there's some fabulous, you can YouTube tapping and begin to do it and hit on those meridian points and get great relief from anxiety and other things. Tapping's wonderful. Self-defined groups like Helping Parents Heal or other groups are really important. One of the things I talk about with my parents is finding their tribe. My tribe really is the parents who have lost their children to suicide, because it's a specific type of death and it comes with its own interesting things. And I studied suicidology for about 10 years. In fact, I had quite a library. I did donate that library when I moved as a sort of a sign of moving on. You know, I read it all, studied it all quite a bit, and I donated it. But I learned an awful lot. So I can understand at a cellular level, really, what those parents are experiencing. I work with parents who've lost children in all kinds of ways, but I'm working with a parent whose child was murdered, and I have encouraged her to find a group on Facebook of mothers or parents who have lost children who've also been murdered, because I find that when you find your tribe, you really can take a deep breath and tell your story and be yourself. And I think some of the greatest healing comes not necessarily from the grief counselors or from the shrinks or from any of the other things, but really comes from talking to a peer who has been there, who has walked the same walk you're walking and has survived it and become resilient. And I think that message that you can do this too is important to people, and it's empowering, and that's the message I want to give.